Hello and welcome to Sound Mind, Sound Body. I am Izzy Naud and this is my platform. It started with a monthly Zoom workshop where I would share some health and well-being tips and practices for electronic music professionals and creators in general. And since this March, it has become a bit like a podcast where I receive guests, and today I'm super excited to have Louisa on. Louisa Pillot, welcome. And Louisa Pillot, is that how we say? Or
Uh, in fact, it doesn't matter. In America, it's Pilat, and in French, it's Pio. So it's really it stopped having any meaning whatsoever.
Okay. Well, Louisa Pillot, professionally known as Louisa, is an artist, performer, and co-founder of the label RAAR. Is it like roaring a bit?
Rawr. I mean, you can again. I've done a really good job at choosing names that have no official sound. So my artist name and my label's name is really it's do what you will.
Okay, so it's the label RAAR because I love the tiger. With over 20 years in the music industry, yes. True to the punk ethos of her music, Louisa is an active advocate for intersectional feminism and mental health in the context of club culture and beyond. And in order to hold space for conversations on these important subjects, Pilot started the podcast Sober Sex. That's when I first heard about you because someone I knew was a guest on Sober Sex
Oh,
in
cool.
2020 and has since become a consent educator, teaching a model of consent that prioritizes somatic awareness, self sovereignty, and personal agency as tools for collective care and liberation. So that raises many questions. First of all, could you give us a definition of consent? What does it mean for you?
That's a really great question. And I think, so many of us learn that consent is very much like about sex education and that it happens only in the context of like sexual situations. Where for me, it's been a huge journey about kind of learning how to be in my body and to respect my own limits, which also means having to kind of confront the spaces in which I violated my own consent repeatedly, especially when it comes to kind of work in the electronic music industry, and especially when it comes to a history of drug addiction and eating disorders and kind of recovery from that. So I prefer to see kind of consent as opposed to like a binary of like no means no or like enthusiastic yes being the only kind of two options that it's kind of a lens with which I can interact with the world based on kind of what my body is telling me about the situation, right? So I teach a model of consent that's about embodied self-consent first. So kind of trusting and learning to listen to my own consent. And then I can kind of from there learn to communicate better and also to receive better, to better listen to others' consent. And so it works starting with self, working into relationship, and then eventually into community. Um, and the exciting part is that it's not meant to be practiced perfectly, right? So it's like it's more about developing a fluency with my own body and then learning how to support myself through challenging situations. So I feel like I always have agency. And when in situations that, would normally kind of bring up a trauma response or in which I don't have agency that are particularly challenging, I start to develop modes of self-soothing and self-care so that the fallout from those situations is not as terrible as it might be if I felt like I had no power in any situation or if I didn't know how to kind of meet myself in spaces of regulation.
Wow, very interesting. So, what comes to me is about the embodiment practices. Like, how can one person feel, question our body, to see like, okay, is it a yes or a no, or in the middle? What tools or what methods? What how can we identify what's going on?
That's such a great question, and it's such a, I think, a rich area of play and exploration because, like, yes and no and everything in between will not feel the same for everybody. And so, an exercise I like to take, people I'm starting to work with in this context is teaching that there is like a yes and a no. There's a yes to no spectrum, right? Where there's like a full body yes and a full body no, and then kind of a bunch of stuff in between, and it will change based on circumstance. It will change based on how much bandwidth I have to deal in that particular moment of that particular day. It will change in relationship. And so, one fun way to kind of start to explore that is to even just like, and we can do this as an exercise now, is to kind of um, think about seeing your favorite person or animal, right? Closing your eyes and envision them in your mind's eye and feel in your body what it feels like to have the opportunity to spend time with them, or to, if it's, for me, it's always like my animals. So it's like, how do I feel if I've been away on a long trip and my dog greets me, and I feel um, basically fireworks. I feel like warm and glowy. There's also some people experience yes, like a full body yes is like kind of a melting sensation, like, so I'm curious, Izzy, what are you experiencing when you experience a full body yes?
I have like it's like tingling a bit, and
Nice.
uh, and there's like the energy that's going up.
Yeah, that's a really, I think, and it sounds like you're very much in your body. I know it took me a long time to kind of be able to listen to my body because a lot of my practices in life were about not feeling feelings ever at all. So a lot of us have a lot to kind of work through to get as immediate a response as you just gave. But it can be very helpful to kind of think about like the five senses and to think about what do I find pleasant or enjoyable, and what does that feel like, to kind of even imagining encountering like a good smell, a friendly face, a pleasurable taste. What does it feel like to, like, I have a horse and I like to kiss him on the nose with his consent, of course. And it brings me, I feel like, so, so to kind of get in, we have the yes covered. And then we think about like, what's something I don't like to do? What's a food I hate, for example? I'm not a big fan of green peppers. I have to say, this will be different for everybody. But when I think about somebody offering me a plate full of like steamed green peppers, I'm like, my whole body is like, like, I feel like, and this is a pretty innocuous one. Like, it's not quite as a full body no as something that might be like more traumatic, but we're not trying to go to like the full end of like the traumatic somatic response. But like, when I think about a food I don't like, or when I think about like hanging out with a person I don't like at all, or if I'm like, ugh, like feel kind of dread. I feel like often a strong no for me is, it feels like kind of doors shutting or like cinder blocks kind of crushing together. And it's very forcefully away. Like the energy is out and strong. And I wonder if you think about a food you detest and somebody being like, would you like some of this? I wonder what your body's response is.
Hmm. I need to find a food that I
I
detest.
know, it can be tough. Or a smell you don't like.
um, yeah, like a smell I don't like would be like, oh, and so it's like, yeah, like this rejection,
Yeah.
and my body going towards
Yeah.
the back.
You really just recoiled really strongly there. And it's like, I think that's a really good sign. It's like, if anything is making me, I will even be like looking at my phone. And if I get an email that I'm just like, ugh, like I will pull back from the device. And so I think, so we can kind of start to get a little bit of a sense within our bodies of what consent or lack thereof feels like. And then kind of between that, there's a lot of kind of subtle range. And I think also it can be important to note that as we become more fluent in embodied consent, that when I start to listen to my no, my own no, and start to kind of have and communicate more clearly my boundaries, that and again, like, this is not, it doesn't have to be with kind of a strong like, it's not for others necessarily to hear my like hardcore no. It's for me to experience and set the boundary in a clear and efficient way. I don't have to kind of make other people feel, or I don't have to project that energy onto others. I can just kind of, set the limit in a way that's kind of, clean and impersonal, right? But I notice that when I start to do that, I start to get what's called like a euphoric no. Is that when my body feels me start to respect my boundary, I feel absolute euphoria, because, in the past that's been rare. I know a lot of us struggle with that. And we might have to work through some anxiety with saying no, especially if we've had, if we've been raised or had, circumstances in our lives where our no hasn't been respected. It can be often, it can feel really scary to say no to literally anything. Or if there's very high stakes or intense power dynamics involved, it can be also really challenging to say no. But the level of liberation that I can offer myself when I respect my own boundaries is immense. And I highly recommend it, because it feels like, for me, it's like glitter cannons. I'm like, what? Like, I respected myself enough to communicate a boundary. This is amazing. So that's also kind of a nice result of this work.
Wow, thank you very much. I'm curious. So, yes, I used to be like a very people pleasing due to my personal life circumstances, and little by little, I learned to say no again, because when I was a kid, my no wasn't respected. That's what happened, and it's very liberating. How would you uh, help someone who has a really hard time saying no?
I think the way I teach that there's a lot of practice involved, that this is definitely like a skill building process. It doesn't necessarily come quickly or easily. For those of us to whom it comes quickly and easily, you probably don't need consent education. Although, I think it can be helpful to everybody in terms of even just like learning how to hear or support others in their boundaries. But so like one exercise that can be fun is like just practicing. Like we will play an A/B person game, and I will offer, kind of theoretical, like, do you want to come to New York with me? Will you give me your phone number and your email? Do you want to have a tour of my house on Zoom? And like your answer will be no. No, 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 no. And you see what happens in your body as that kind of happens, right? The first round is just no. The second round would be something like, that it's still theoretical, but yes is an option. So you have to start to listen to your embodied yes or no. And then and then we can go back and forth, kind of saying no and receiving no. And as soon as you tell me your no, I will respond by feeling your no in my body and saying thank you. I will try and find a space from which I can be genuinely grateful for your boundary. And then you will reciprocate. And this is basically just like, it seems silly, it seems like kind of play acting, especially remotely, which is where I do most of my teaching. But this idea of kind of being met, having consistent practice with our nervous systems, especially being met with gratitude for our no, is a really great thing. And it also, I think, to offer that to somebody else, like, I find that people who can tell me no are safe relationships. Right. And to start to learn that in real time, because if somebody says yes all the time, I actually don't know whether I'm in violation of their boundaries. So it can be kind of scary as the kind of partner in that situation, whatever type of relationship that is, because it means that if I am putting the other person in a place of discomfort or lack of security, that they won't tell me. Right. And I can't read minds. So I'm much more likely to cause harm without even knowing it. And that's not my goal in a relationship. So our ability to say no and our ability to kind of voice and communicate our own boundaries it makes us safer relationships for others to be in. And, it generally makes us better at also hearing others' no's.
Right. And I'm curious. So, as a tool in collective care,
Mm.
you, how does that? How is that illustrated?
What do you mean by collective care? Kind of in a communal sense?
Yes, look. So, like when we're in a social situation, and sometimes there's like the peer pressure.
Mm,
What comes to my
absolutely.
um, so how can we facilitate a safe space in within the club culture and the music industry where it's like a lot about image and even more now? Well, what comes to mind for you?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, when you talk about like communal or collective care, this idea of like power dynamics, I think is a really important thing to recognize because it's a problem or it's a reality that we're not going to move around necessarily. So I find that the most kind of dangerous type of power dynamic is one that's not acknowledged because like in those circumstances it's much easier to be like, but I'm a nice guy, like why would you feel like you were pressured into something? It's much harder to kind of be aware of the dynamic in situations where it's not acknowledged, and it kind of is silent and unexpressed. And so I feel like within communal care, acknowledging power dynamics, including acknowledging where, as you mentioned, peer pressure might come to play, um, is an important part. And I think, what I'm learning over time is cultivating spaces where like it's it's not kind of a majority. The stream must not move in the direction of the majority is really great. Like um that I've found personally that kind of encouraging people to meet their own needs and to express their own needs as opposed to creating an anticipation that everybody will need or want the same thing. It works really well for everybody being able to play together safely.
Mm.
Um, and also I think, again, kind of um, not encouraging dissent, but like having conversations where no is welcome, is very useful, especially if you are kind of the person in power, the person that others are looking to kind of control the situation. And again, like, this will always shift, of course, from workspace to club space, like the spaces in which we're working, especially if your workspace is a club space, and drugs and alcohol are involved, or that people are kind of going out to feel hedonistic. So that there's this kind of anticipation that like desire is more important than boundaries. Um, that can be very confusing. But I think the more we kind of cultivate this in our relationships, kind of globally, like it becomes my responsibility to take care of myself, and then to offer and support that for others to do the same. And it does end up being a ripple effect, right? That the more kind of supported I feel in that endeavor, the more I can encourage friends to do the same because I don't need them to behave in a certain way in order for me to feel safe. I have my own back and I can ask for support where I need it, but it's nobody else's responsibility to read my mind and meet my needs. And the more we can kind of cultivate this idea that it's like, it's a two-way street. Like I can't read your mind and I can't be responsible for you. So when you tell me that I'm violating your consent, um, that because I didn't know what was necessary. Like I'll give you an example that's kind of unburdened. Like I'm a vegan.
Okay.
If I accept a dinner invitation, but I don't tell the host that I'm a vegan, they can't meet my need. So it's my responsibility to inform the other party of what my needs are in that specific situation. um, I am responsible for that. It's not their responsibility to read my mind and to anticipate it. And if I'm like, I didn't tell them and they didn't know, and therefore I can't eat anything here, that's still kind of my problem, you know? So this idea of kind of uh, agency and responsibility being a mutual a mutual and important thing that we cultivate within our relationships to help support each other and feel safer and have, you know, like healthier relationships in which we can all flourish. Because I don't need, again, I don't need you to read my mind, and I don't feel like a victim when you don't read my mind. Because that's also, you know, that like that behavior, I think, leads in a great part to kind of cancel culture or creating spaces where that nobody feels safe, you know?
Right. Oh, I have a practical question. So
Yes.
you, as an artist, in your writer, is there like some specifics saying about saying that you're vegan, that you're sober? How does that work?
Um, you know, it's interesting question about the sobriety. Like, yes, because it's difficult to find food I can eat in a lot of airports and train stations. I try and have vegan options or like even protein bars available for the travel the next day, right? So I kind of try and like create best circumstances for myself with my rider. As far as recovery is concerned, like um I I don't have, I think I might have like a beer on my rider just for friends that might show up, but it's like my recovery is a little bit separate from this in that I really consider it, especially within our industry, my responsibility to take care of. Um, and my responsibility to kind of enlarge my spiritual and enlarge my spiritual life that um the things I cannot change, which is like other people's behavior, doesn't affect my equilibrium when it comes to drug or alcohol use and being sober.
Okay.
So weirdly, the sobriety is not really part of my rider. Although, you know, sometimes I don't really appreciate people smoking and doing cocaine in my dressing room. Like I don't like that behavior and I find it like disrespectful and annoying. But if it's a communal space, that's not really up for me, you know, then I'll try and find somewhere else.
Right. And like, and regarding alcohol, for example, have you seen talking with other professionals and artists if some who stop drinking alcohol, if they require having non-alcoholic drinks that are something else than water and sodas? Is that starting to come up? Like alcohol-free beer. There's also now some alcohol-free liquors. You can even have like alcohol-free gin if you like a gin and tonic, but 0%. That can happen. What do you think about all this, these new opportunities?
It's funny because I did some writing on this morning. Mostly because I got sober when I was 20 and it was 2006. So like this was so not a concern. And it was so very much like my drug of choice was really cocaine. I stopped drinking to do more cocaine, which is like a psychotic move, by the way. Like it's a rare breed. Um, um, so this idea of kind of being able to have a new experience of pleasure with beverages is like kind of beyond me. um, and I think it's such a cool thing to kind of have new options, you know, like it's such a sweet thing that people are like giving a fuck about sober people. But in my experience, it's so secondary. I just have like a lot of sparkling water on my rider and more recently like yerba mate, like club mate. But I think it's, you know, I just saw that Patrick Topping is going to throw a sober rave. You know, I think that what you're talking about is coming much more mainstream. And I know that we've discussed in the past in our personal conversations, like the idea of kind of cultivating spaces that aren't there, that are club spaces that aren't necessarily prioritizing drinking and getting loaded as the only interesting thing to do. And I think that that's really exciting. Like, I'm curious as to kind of what that feels like because that's not been my experience. You know, I got sober and then continued to kind of work in nightlife as like a rapscallion, essentially. It's like a sober barnacle who wouldn't leave and got by on scraps. And now I'm like, but you could have a nice beverage. And I'm like, give me my sparkling water, you know, like so. So yeah, I mean, I think I haven't necessarily heard of that that hasn't been my experience, but I think it's really exciting as an option, especially for people who are kind of getting sober now and have more options than, again, as you said, just like water or soda or juice.
Mm, good, good. Thank you. I have a question about okay, how does consent help prevent burnout? Because
Ooh.
I got a burnout and I definitely can, looking back to it, is that I was never saying no to nobody.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, and I think that you're not alone in that. You know, we see it as kind of an epidemic in many industries right now, especially the music industry, especially post-COVID. And even today, like I was mentioning before we started recording, that like I had therapy right before this, which is like just mostly complaining. Um, Shout out David, my therapist. But you know, I think a lot of times we can see burnout as a kind of an evolution of ignoring our body's limits, you know? And so this idea of really cultivating and taking seriously when our brains or our bodies are kind of our somatic responses are no longer able to show up for something, as opposed to overriding that, which like my, you know, even myself, like it's taken a long time to like to learn that it's important to say no on occasion. Often because like, you know, the high stakes of that never saying no is burnout. But the lower stakes of never saying no is like resentment, right? That like I said yes to something that I don't feel like is meeting my needs. And now I'm pissed, but I said yes, you know, like I didn't kind of utilize my own agency in that situation. And now I'm mad. Um, and I think one solution to that, or one kind of pathway to evading that, is to really kind of the exercise that we took, that we did in the beginning, that kind of recoiling feeling. Like if I feel, I try and get in my body whenever I accept a gig offer. Um, and you know, I can, if I feel a full body yes, awesome. It's a yes, cool. If I look at the conditions and I feel kind of like, "Ugh," like if I put myself in the position of the person who will have to show up for that gig, and it's like not enough money, there are two unavoidable plane layovers, like um you know, the set is too long for the money that they're offering, and I know it'll be taxing on my body, especially kind of considered like a long flight time, etc. Then I have to take that person into account. And like, you know, I think in this industry specifically, and in many creative industries, there's this pressure that doesn't necessarily exist everywhere. That's like, oh, I'm so lucky to be able to do this. I should just be grateful they asked. And at a certain point, like I've been doing this for 20 years. And if I want to continue to do it for another 20 years, I have to take my uh serenity seriously. You know, so if I start to feel like they're asking a lot for not a lot, they're asking a lot for a little, um, then I have to kind of like, there's always the nice thing about especially kind of gig stuff is that there's typically room for negotiation. So and this usually goes through my agent. So I can say, is it possible to have an extra day so I can kind of allow my body to adjust after a long travel? Or is it possible to raise the offer to something that would make it possible for me to go without feeling like I'm kind of being taken advantage of? You know, like I'm able, once I get the embodied feeling about it, or if some more subtle signals might be like a little bit of tightness in my chest or a little bit of nausea. Like those are also kind of ways that my body tells me that this is too much. Um, then I can start to kind of make choices that respect where my limits are. And then like if let's say the promoter says absolutely not, this is the final offer, um then I can kind of regroup and again ask myself, like, is that something I can do without feeling like I will regret doing so when I get on that second plane, you know? Um for instance? Or is it like, and of course, like other circumstances, if I have a slow month coming up, then maybe it's a really good idea to take that gig. But it's important that I kind of can ground in my own agency and make choices from an informed and compassionate space, as opposed to just kind of feeling like I have to say yes to everything and then feeling like a victim of the situation, right? And of course, like there will be circumstances like that are not about money. I remember I got an offer in Beirut a while ago. It was right after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, and I was really anxious to go, and my management advised me not to because there was like chaos. There had been bombings recently. It was really scary. And then the promoter wrote and said, like, it's really important to us, and we don't take lightly this offer. We know you'd be kind of putting yourself in potential danger to come, but music is what's keeping us alive right now, and we would really, really appreciate your presence, and we do our best to keep you safe. And for me to kind of get aligned with to ground in a desire to go with an altruistic motive of like bringing music to people who, had been through a lot, was a very like, that was a clean choice as opposed to one that felt like I was pressured into it, you know? So it's not always going to be like the money that's the issue. It can always be something else that kind of convinces us, but it's important, I think, in the context of consent to make sure that we are able to feel like we can make a choice and no is an option, you know?
Right. Yeah, talking about going like to Beirut and so what would you advise an artist, a touring artist, when they get an opportunity of being booked in a place where there's war, for example? Last weekend there was a gig from Mark Romboy and Robert Babix in Kiev in Ukraine, and it's like, whoa, there's war happening. It's like it's very courageous from them to go, and the people who have them that it's just like helps them go through what they're living and build more resilience. Like, what would you advise to artists who get such offers for gigs in these areas?
I mean, I think, it's not up to the person. I mean, on some level, it's up to the person who's making the offer, not to create situations that will be imminently dangerous to whoever they're inviting, right? And that goes for, gigs and potentially, complicated territories too. Like, you want to like I'm trying to come up with a food analogy, but like you don't want to feed an allergen to somebody. It's like it's on one hand kind of important that the person who's making the offer can do so by creating the most secure conditions impossible, but it's also up to the artist to kind of make wise decisions for themselves, right? To know, like, is this something I can tolerate? Are these conditions that I am able to accept living in the reality of? Or do I think kind of a big trap when it comes to consent stuff and, life in general is this like being at odds with reality, like thinking that it's going to be different than I know it will be, right? Because I hope it might be different. Like, that's living in fantasy and not reality. And I think if we do that enough, it really creates a lot of bitterness. Like, I know that I'm in danger of this when I'm just like, if they would just, if they would just behave differently and everything would be perfect, like that's a me problem. I'm not accepting the world as it is. So if I'm willing to accept, life on life's terms, as we like to say in recovery, then and move into a situation like aware of the danger that I am putting myself in, no one is forcing me into. And I can do so with like a clear conscience and integrity of my purpose that I'm choosing to kind of take on, then like that's beautiful. And I think it can be really rewarding. But if I go in expecting 5-star treatment in a country that's like doesn't have the capacity to give that to me in that moment, then I am delusional. That's once again a me problem. you know, like I think the most important part of a lot of this is like being willing to accept reality as it is and make decisions from there. Like it is on a kind of spiritual level. A lot of this work is about like radical acceptance, you know?
Okay. I have a question regarding mental health. What would you
Don't
consider
do
to
it. Just kidding. No mental health. Just kidding.
no mental health? That's bad
None.
for you. What would be your pillars to that your practices that allow you to feel centered and balanced uh, throughout the year and all your traveling and your gigs?
That's a good question. I love a morning routine. I think we've discussed this. And I love that like you do a lot of cultivating that in terms of like your own personal practices and also with your clients, Izzy. Like I think that it's such an important part of, like in the context of consent stuff, it's like looking at the difference between kind of self-care and self-soothe. And the more, and self-care gets kind of a bad rap because it's like Gwyneth Paltrow co-opted it and now it's capitalism. But um, this idea of like, if I take my self-care seriously, I can kind of build up a robustness and a bandwidth that I can accept challenging circumstances with a lot more ease. And I can kind of meet life on life's terms and live in reality when it's challenging with much less tax. The cost is much lower if I have a kind of bank of resources. For me, those resources look like um, participating in 12-step recovery is a really big part of mine because it means that I have access to community and support and a space to be very honest. Oh, ding. Sorry, I don't know how to turn on Do Not Disturb. So I can try and do it, even though I don't know how. Focus. What is the don't disturb me anyway. So that's kind of for me, that's a bit my ground zero, just because again, like I got sober when I was super young and I was basically told that if you don't do this, you'll die. And I was like, okay. And since then, it's been like a really beautiful part of my life. And if anybody is struggling with drug or alcohol addiction, great, huge recommendation, and feel free to slide up in my DMs if you want to talk about it. So that's a big part. Secondly, I try and exercise a minimum of like 5 to 7 hours a week, just because I run a little hot, and it really helps kind of regulate my anxiety and depression, and it gives me time outside. It gives me time interacting with nature because a lot of my exercise is equestrian sports. So that's a huge privilege. I relate, but just like having time outside and or with animals is really great. Just because I feel like for me, that's the easiest way to co-regulate. Humans can be complicated for some of us. So that's a good one. And then I do morning pages every day and pray and meditate every day. And I find if I can do 4 out of 5 days a week, I'm great. And if I can't, then I start to see my ability to cope a little bit diminished.
Well, thank you for this. Yes. I noticed, so recently I joined a mentoring program for entrepreneurs. And
Ooh.
so my regular schedule of training from Monday through Friday on the evenings got disrupted, and I have less training. And my body has started complaining, being like, "Oh, this is not possible. We're feeding the brain and the mental with all this information. It's stimulating. It's great." And my body is like, "I don't want to be sitting in a chair 3 hours and a half like that and absorbing and not moving." And so I'm super grateful that I had several friends around me who practice Tai Chi who said, "Okay, let's meet on the Saturday. Let's meet. Today we met. It's a holiday here in Barcelona, and we met with a friend and another Tai Chi teacher and other Tai Chi practitioners." And it was like, wow, this made me like so happy, and to like it really nurtures me. And I'm like, I can't stop doing my practice, because after I feel like a flower without water, depleted.
Absolutely.
So
But I
it's
mean,
really
sorry to interrupt, but it sounds like also the fact that you kind of found a workaround, like the fact that you were able to kind of meet both needs, even if, like, I always have a little friction when like schedules get adjusted, especially surrounding training. But it seems like you got like communal support, physical activity, and that you were able to kind of, yeah, like nourish yourself in a way that was really necessary in order to like show up as your best self for the mentoring, right? That like, I mean, I think that that's ideal, right? When our practice can kind of meet us where we need it and allow us to feel supported in whatever circumstances we're moving through, good or bad.
definitely, yes. I think it's a matter of like getting to know ourselves really well, and so we can see like what works for us, what doesn't work for us, and of course it's trial and error, and we
Absolutely.
learn living. Life is an experience, a sequence of experience after experience after experience, and it's trial and error, and then we manage to get closer to what fits us at a certain moment, because we can also change, and yes, it's stimulating. It's really exciting, I think, to experience life and being like, oh, we're in this learning process, and whatever we go through, it's like either it happens or it's a lesson. It's either
Yeah. Lessons and blessings. This are the options, right? Like, um, but sorry, there was a fly. Um, but I'm sure this will be really pleasant for the people who are listening later to to feel the vibe of the conversation. But I really liked also kind of what you were talking about. Like we learn about our needs, right? We learn what works for us, and I think that a lot of what this work can do is kind of allow me to have needs, because I think a lot of us are like, oh, I if I have needs I will be like deeply unlovable or unemployable or like problematic, and I think one of the most wonderful parts of this stuff is like being like, no, 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 this is like a non-negotiable. Like this has to be in my life. And if it means that like I can kind of arrange things around it, awesome. Like if it means that I won't take a meeting before 10 a.m. because I'm gonna spend the first couple hours of my day working out, cool. But if it means that like the meeting has to happen at 8 a.m., it means I wake up at 5. If I don't have to do it regularly, like that's fine. It's I think it's this idea of like learning how to support ourselves by making choices that kind of allow us to kind of meet our own needs in a way that allows a good life, as opposed to be like, oh, none of my needs are met, mother, but like I hate everything, which is not a great way to live. Like it's painful, it's suffering.
right. Yes. Hmm. Yes, thank you, Louisa. I'd like to open the floor if someone has a question in the audience. Michelle or Jessica, is there anything you want to share? You can unmute yourself.
I don't necessarily have questions. I've just been listening intensely, and I've been taking some notes, things to take with me for myself. And I wrote down also the whole consent thing sounds to be like really about finding your authenticity within your body, and with that creating like a healthy relationship with yourself, and also it balances the relationship you have with others. I used to be a people pleaser, and then people would tell me the whole relationship is out of balance because you get a hierarchy all of a sudden instead of being on the same level, and you're not very likable because you're not authentic. You're lying when you're a people pleaser. It's truly, you're lying and you're trying to get something out of it, and people might not really know it, but they feel it at some to some extent. So I think this is really awesome work because it's applicable to everything, like to every single thing in life. And I really like that. I saw one of the posts when it was about food, and it clicked for me as well. Um, is my body consenting to this, you know, and is my emotional self consenting to this or not? And I wonder if that has something to do with the fact that I'm now 6 days on and I've had 1 cup of coffee with sugar and one tiny little piece of cake, while every day I was eating shitloads of sugar. And so I did a fast because my body kept telling me to do a fast, but I wasn't listening to it. So it's yeah, I just love the way things, they fall into place when people, you know, come across your path in life. And so this is a very long way of saying thank you. And I think it's very valuable. Yeah, I think people can learn so much from this, and it will have a ripple effect, because when relationships between two people become healthier, the other person maybe start implementing it with their other relationships and so forth, and doing it in places like the music industry. The ripple effect can be enormous, like enormous. That's why I'm also doing it in this industry, besides my love for it. So I can't think of a question right now, but I just had this whole thing of and I forgot about the morning pages. Thanks for the reminder. Yeah.
Oh, awesome. I'm so happy to see you in this context, Michelle. We've been trying to connect for like 6 weeks, maybe more, and it's nice that it finally happened tonight.
Yeah, most definitely.
Yeah, I'll chime in quickly that I'm so grateful that, you know, that you shared that you were doing this. And it's just really, I mean, even just listening to this conversation and just feeling how so much of this is located in the body, you know, and that's something that's separate from like your intellect and like your ability to sort of like discern the psychological implications of your actions on a daily basis, or like historically how your interactions have developed over time. And so, yeah, I really appreciate the guidance and the holding the sort of like the softness of just the fragility of that work, you know, and that like I do feel that this is something where I'm severely like programmed in the wrong way, and that is so much at my own hands. Sure, I had dynamics in my life which set me up to sort of really just have no sense of consent, you know, and I do think this is very connected to being a woman, you know, and that we start to confront the idea of consent before we even understand what this full body yes is. Like, I think that's something that I love, the analogy that you brought forth of like interacting with our animals, because that to me is much more connected to being a child, you know. And we come into the world perhaps knowing the sense of the full body yes, but many of us lose it. And so I really want to follow more of your work here in this space, because it feels like a frontier, like to give like a kind of language and a conversation to this, because, you know, so much of my way of like, you know, I'm also in recovery and that's how I know you. So much of the navigating toward that space of new health, or like it is about like saying yes to the spaces that feel safe and letting go of the things that didn't. But on a daily basis, like, you know, talking about the music industry, I'm involved in the art industry, like to be healthily involved in these spaces, we can't just say no. And if we say no, then perhaps we are going to be resentful that we didn't follow our calling or something, you know, that we just like had to like let go of this entire world that like operated in a way that we could not tolerate, and rightfully so, or to resent those that are able to tolerate it, you know. So just this way of navigating the intricacies of being in those spaces that we can't control, you know, and what that looks like in the body. That so it's not really a question, but I guess, you know, it's like, maybe it is. It's like, I guess over time, like, how does this very rigorous work of reprogramming the body. The mind is the, you know, the way in a sense, but the body is the thing that you are tuning. Do you just, yeah, have any advice on like how to sort of steer that course, you know, other than keeping at it, like talking about routine and self-care, you know, like it feels very delicate, you know?
Mhm. That's such an awesome question, Jess. I'm so happy that you came. I think I wanted to touch on a couple of things because I think they do really link also with Michelle's kind of comments on like living authentically. And it's also like we live in a society, you know? So it's how to balance both truths of like, I live in a society and therefore I'm forced to accept the things I cannot change. And I'm working towards authenticity. So like, how do I respect my own boundaries and needs? And I think what you were talking about, especially like, you know, being assigned female at birth and being socialized away from my own consent is like a fucking heavy reality that, I mean, everybody in this conversation is a lady. So I think that that's one big part of this work in terms of like learning learning embodied consent fluency, working towards fluency, building that skill is moving through grief of all of the times that I failed to support my own boundaries, all the times that I violated my own consent, all the times I violated other people's consent without knowing it or without wanting to, and all of the times that my own consent has been violated. And so I think the grief work is really important. And my friend and collaborator Brooks Herr is having a workshop. I think it's a 3-week workshop on grief and boundaries and consent education via the consent wizardry school of consent, which is also where I was trained. And I think that's coming up the end of October if anybody's interested. They're awesome, like fantastic. Anyway, so grief I think is a big part of that, and kind of moving through the like trusting that process of grieving the loss, even if it's ambiguous, of when I didn't have this information and when I didn't have these tools. So I think that that's an important part of this process that is not to be taken lightly, but will also offer me kind of a robust and resourced space to come from with compassion as I move through the hard work of both being able to kind of see the bigger picture, which is like, this is where I want to be. These are the goals that I have. This is the spaces that I want to operate in professionally or personally. And also this is how it feels in my body because they can be kind of divisive, right? And the goal, I think, in a lot of ways is to not self-abandon. And so it's to kind of go, I know that for me, like, in a lot of ways, my body will be like, no, 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 no. Like, I don't like airports, for example. Like, they stress me out. I feel like I will find myself at an airport at 6 a.m. without any having sleep, coming straight from a gig, crying by myself. Like, and then, you know, my old response used to be like, get your shit together. We don't have time for your feelings. You know, whereas now it's like, I've stocked my fridge for when I come home. I've like created a plan of who I can reach out to based on time zone differences. So I can kind of have, you know, points that I prepared to escort myself through a challenging scenario, because moving through that challenge is not unsafe. It's uncomfortable, but it's not unsafe. If I abandon myself there, very unsafe. But if I kind of use the tools that I've developed to stay in my body and to continue to tell myself like, look, I'm not going to leave you here. I have your back. We made choices. They put us in this challenging situation of being in an airport in a country where nobody speaks English at 6 a.m. after no sleep and not eating regular food for like 48 hours. But I will not leave you here. And this is moving towards the bigger adventure of, you know, wanting to have a career that can sustain us in the music industry for the rest of our lives, right? So it's this bigger, like, how can, like, for instance, I'm taking medication for a gut issue right now. The medication is fucking disgusting. But, and my body, every time I open the packet, is like, does not want to take the medication. But I as like the adult in this in the room, like with the prefrontal cortex, is like, this is for a bigger picture good. I want to be able to feel better. So I will override my body's consent with a bigger picture goal while not abandoning myself in that space of like, shut up, we don't have time for you, you know? It's like, I think the compassion is maybe the link between those two wings of like, what's unsafe versus what's uncomfortable, and how do I frame it in a way that I have agency? And if I can't do that, then maybe I can like look, if I can't find ways to support myself through that process, or if I can't have compassion for the parts of me that are like freaking out, then that's where the deeper work must occur. Sorry for that. That was a lengthy answer.
Thank you, Louisa. And I think the time is up, and I don't want to hold you longer, everybody. And thank you very much for all this interesting sharing, Louisa. And thank you, Michelle and Jessica, for participating and joining us. And we'll maybe see each other in Amsterdam for ADE
Oh
next
yeah.
month. That would be really nice. And
Definitely.
Michelle will be my guest next month. So
Woo!
this is exciting as well. And
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing your platform with us, Izzy.
and I'm so excited that this became a platform and not only me sharing about tips and practices, my tips and practices. So thank you very much. And I will share the links to Louisa's socials and website and podcast in the description. In this goes on YouTube, the replay, and then I share the links of my guests and also my links. So I'll stop the recording now.